I keep saying, I don't have time for this, and I don't have time for that, and I don't have time for this, and I haven't written anything in years. What happened to me as the writer? Where's my writer person? She's buried under this pile of administration. So I actually did a crazy thing. I left. I left my lucrative, successful job, and I simplified my life drastically.
Welcome to the Portfolio Life with Jeff Goins. I'm your host, Andy Traub, and this is the show that helps you pursue work that matters, make a difference with your art, and discover your true voice. You know, many of us think a writing career is a straight line. You choose to be a certain kind of writer, and then you become that writer. That's not usually the case, though, and today's guest, Margaret Roach, is living proof. Margaret has had a lot of different jobs in the world of writing, and she's grateful for all of them. Today you get to find out how they helped her become the amazing writer that she is, and which one of the writing mediums is her favorite. Here's our friend Jeff Goins and author Margaret Roach.
Today I am interviewing Margaret Roach. Margaret is an author, blogger, and gardener. Her blog is A Way to Garden, and her most recent book is The Backyard Parables, Lessons on Gardening and Life. Margaret, welcome.
It's nice to be with you finally, to get to connect.
Great to have you. Great to meet like this, and thanks for your time today.
You're welcome. Thank you.
So, Margaret, you are a professional writer. I mean, you are doing the dream. Can you talk a little bit about what you do, and then we can talk about maybe how you got there?
Sure. I've been a journalist, and that's kind of how I primarily think about myself. I've been a journalist for, close to 30 years, so I'm not quite as young as some of your listeners, but I started in newspapers and worked in magazines and so forth, and now I work for myself and write books and do a website, as you mentioned. And I'm a journalist who made my way sort of through the maze of subjects that I did earlier in my career to finally be able to write about my particular passion, which is gardening. So I have a specialty, but I have over the years applied my journalism skills to many, many, many different subjects.
So this is interesting because I think, you're fairly web savvy, and I think we're seeing more of this type of model where somebody picks a topic that they're passionate about and starts a community, a blog or whatever, and then is able to publish books and kind of build a writing career around that audience. And what's interesting is you're doing that, but you had these years of practice before you got to a point where you could put work out there about, your particular passion and then be able to do that professionally. So before we talk about that side of things, can you talk about the practice side of things? What do you have to do to get to a point where you can actually do that?
Where you can actually write about the thing that you love. If there is a particular subject, that's your thing. And some people like to write about many, many, many different things. But right. There are others of us among writers who I think we cherish, we have this cherished subject that we hope will be able to be heard about at some point in our careers. For me, I started, and I should say, over the years, I've taken many jobs editing other people's writing also, because I couldn't always get writing work or a job at a given time as a writer. So a lot of times I was the person behind the writers, doing copy editing and higher level editing and assignment editing and so forth at newspapers and magazines as well. So for me, the first probably how many years at the New York Times and then at Newsday, I kept getting jobs, assignments on various desks editing. And I knew that I wanted to write feature stuff, but it was really, really competitive to get writing assignments. And so I would do a little bit here and there, I'd sort of freelance a little bit here and there, but generally speaking, I was copy editing. And then what happened is I kept saying sort of out loud, as if anyone would care, that I really loved gardening and I hoped someday I could write about that. And they kept saying, well, we only have one garden editor and she's not leaving anytime soon. That went on for a long time. And I finally left the Times and went to work at Newsday newspaper in Long Island. And they had a garden editor already too. But I sort of said, gee, can I do an occasional feature? I was working as the fashion editor of all the crazy things. And if you know me, you'd know that's not an area of my great interest, fashion. So I kind of did the fashion editor job. But I said, I have an idea for a garden story. I'll do it on my own time. And I sort of voluntarily did a little extra credit work. And by doing that, I ended up eventually inheriting the garden writing job. But I was well into my career before my passion, my personal passion, matched my journalism work. Before that, I was writing about or editing in sports, in finance. I was on the photo desk for a while at the Times. Fashion, lots of different assignments that had no real interest for me.
So, do you think that those experiences were valuable, or were they, if you'd go back and do it again, you wouldn't do them?
I used the experience from those assignments every single day, even decades later, even here now, running a garden website and writing memoir-style books, for a national publisher. I use the disciplines that I was trained in by having to do those subjects because those subjects the things I was in, fashion, finance, sports, I didn't know anything about those. They didn't come naturally to me, and I didn't have an affinity for them. And so I had to really use repertorial skills. I had to really learn to interview well, to interview people, to research well and thoroughly. And those skills, if you can do it about a subject you don't even like, if you can really research and suss out a subject you don't even like and you don't even know anybody to talk to about, if you can do that using those, reporter skills, that's really your greatest asset, I think, as a writer, no matter what you end up writing, whether you end up writing a biography of some famous person or your own memoir or newspaper stories or magazine features. Being a good reporter and a researcher, a disciplined reporter and researcher, is enormously valuable.
Can you speak for a second to the people that don't want to do what you did, that don't want to pay their dues or think, I can, because I think that there really is an opportunity to build a platform very quickly online, get a large audience, and then, start delivering content to them, get a publishing contract, write and sell books, and that's okay. But I think that there's a tendency, and I've even seen this in my own career, that you can kind of expedite that unnaturally to a point that you don't have anything to say. You have an audience, but you don't have anything to say. I
was going to say, sometimes you get into that situation and you see it happening when things, I'm a plant person, so I think about like when I sow seeds at this time of year, and if I don't care for them the right way, if they don't get what they need at the right time and take their time to grow slowly, they stretch out and then flop over. So, I think of sometimes what happens is we have to do that. We have to do that old-fashioned beginning work. And I think it's good for us. I don't mean to sound like some boring old-fashioned person, but I think it is good for us. And I think you do run the risk otherwise of getting to a point on your website or in your writing where there's no there, where, you haven't made a reputation for yourself that can precede you. So I don't know. I think it's okay to have to make the investment of time. And I also think that it's okay to write for lots of other places, to write as much as you can. I guess what I'm trying to say is to write as much as you can, and to welcome the opportunity to write for all kinds of places, because you're going to get better at it, and it's not going to be bad for you. And I learned something even now, like I've done some freelance writing. I hadn't done freelance writing in probably 20 years because I had been an executive for many years. I ran the magazines and internet and booked stuff at Martha Stewart's company for many years before I left to kind of move to my garden and write books again, and about 5 years ago. And, I've been doing some freelance lately just for income. And it's been so interesting, like doing that again and writing pitch letters and refining assignments and then going through the editing process with people, with new editors. And, it's good. It's good for you. It's okay. Even me. It's okay.
So can you tell this story of what you're doing now that you've been doing for the past 5 or so years? Mm-hmm. How did you take that leap, and what prompted you to step into full-time writing and gardening? And, what precipitated that? Why did you do that? And how did you make it possible? Because I think a lot of people listening to this, are in a situation where they go, I'd love to be a full-time writer, but I just don't know how to make that happen.
Right. I was at a stage where I had wanted to be a writer early in my career. As I said, now here's going to go the cat telling us what he wants to do. Do you have a pet? You probably have a pet. And do you have a recalcitrant pet? Yeah, he's going to tell us that he wants to go out. We may have to make a little noise. Otherwise, we're going to hear nothing but cat for the next however many minutes that we speak. Okay, there goes Mr. Jack. Jack the demon cat, we call him. Anyway, I was at a stage in my career, maybe 7 years into it, where the path to get promoted was offered to me, a substantial promotion, not just the usual ones you have early on, but, a substantial one was offered to me. But it was definitely a departure away from writing or any opportunity to write, more into the managerial executive kind of direction. And it was really hard because the more meetings you go to and the more people you manage, the less you can express your personal creativity. There just isn't time. That's not the job you're being paid for. You're being paid to facilitate other people to express themselves, in the name of the brand you're working for. So I took that path because it was a good opportunity. But what happened is I got kind of stifled and buried under all those years of all those meetings and all those people I was looking after and managing and editing and so forth. So I got to a point in my life where I said, uh-oh. And this happens when you can, sometimes for people it happens in their 40s or when they approach 50, but you go like, wow, I keep saying I don't have time for this and I don't have time for that and I don't have time for this and I haven't written anything in years. What happened to me as the writer? Where's my writer person? She's buried under this pile of administration. So I actually did a crazy thing. I left my lucrative, successful job and moved to my tiny little funny house where I had had a weekend garden for many years in a rural community in New York State. And I simplified my life drastically to be able to do that. I just basically eliminated everything I could. And, as I said before, I've been doing freelance and I teach workshops in gardening and I do some work with WordPress, coaching with people who are doing WordPress sites, and I have about 15 part-time jobs. And I was very lucky to write a book proposal the first year that I left and sell a book, and then 2 years later sell another one. So I've written 2 books in the 5 years. So I've sort of I've written a couple 100,000 words in books and a couple of thousand blog posts in 5 years. So I think I've made up for all the years I was silenced by my executive responsibilities. But it's not easy, and even though I consider myself a successful writer in that I've been published in, top-notch places. I just did a editorial op-ed piece for the New York Times a couple of weeks ago. And, so I'm out there. I keep myself out there. But these are not lucrative things. You have to piece a lot of it together to make a living. And you have to live on a budget. And fortunately, writers are solitary and writers like to stay home. So we don't need a lot of lunch money. We don't need a lot of wardrobe, right? Because we're home writing, right? So isn't that good? Right?
Yeah, so good.
Right. Save on the dry cleaning bills, Jeff, right? Stay home.
That's right. Yeah, I just got to stock up on pajamas because that's what I end up sitting in some days.
I didn't know you wore the same thing I did.
So this is great. And I should mention that this story of you kind of transitioning to a slower, more rural lifestyle is cataloged in your other book, right? And that's called And I Shall Have Some Peace There. Is that right?
Correct. That's right. That's sort of what I call my Dropout Memoir. And that is a book about saying, hey, life is short. I want to write again and I want to garden. I want to see my garden every day. And for me, the writing and the gardening are really one piece of the same aspect of me. They're very connected because I draw in my writing. And I think this is an important point, not just for me, but I draw from the natural world. I draw my inspiration for all my creative pursuits, for the way I cook, the way I use color in my own my home environment. I'm inspired by the natural world. The things I'm interested in, science and why do things happen, sort of the things I read, the way that I write. The garden is really, or nature is really my, it informs me and informs my ethics, my understanding of my place in the world. So we each need to have something. If we're going to be, I think, a good writer, we have to have something that's our point of view, no matter whether the assignment one week is about X and about Y the next week. They hire you for your point of view, your frame of reference, your voice. So oddly enough, my expertise in gardening has made me a good writer about many other subjects. Like I was hired to write a story actually 2 different stories for some spirituality and yoga magazines and so forth recently. They approached me because they see that my approach to garden writing is kind of spiritual and they wanted to know what that was about. So, the oddest things can happen if you have, again, a strong point of view and voice and you become known for it.
Yeah, absolutely. So can we talk about the blogging and the platform stuff? What I'm interested in knowing, because I don't know this, is were you doing this while you were working at Martha Stewart, or did you just kind of jump out into the unknown and then you started all of this stuff? How did that work? Because you have a widely popular blog about gardening, and I think this sets you up to write a book about gardening, and the publisher knows they're not taking a big risk on you, and that people are probably going to buy it and read it. So can you talk about the story of the blog and how that did or didn't connect with your books? Did it come before or after?
Sure. I had run the project when we started marthastewart.com. I had been in charge of the internet division of the company. So I had a background from the beginning of the internet as an editorial medium. I understood it well enough. And so when I knew I was going to leave my job, while I was sort of getting prepared to leave my job, I started researching platforms. And again, my repertorial skills, I'm a good researcher, and I picked WordPress. I knew that was going to be the one. And I immersed myself in it, got involved with going to word camps and so forth as I was in my transition, studying up, meeting other people who were into it. And I sort of got here, left my job, got here to Nowheresville, and sort of said, hey, what can I do to stay in touch, to have a community? Because I used to be, the editor in the front of Martha Stewart Living magazine. The first thing you saw was my picture and my, obviously Martha, but I was the editor who said, hey, this is what's in this month's issue. There I was. I had a big audience, millions of people every month. So how could I at least have a little audience here in my new life? So I thought, okay, WordPress, okay, what do I have to say? Well, I've got some gardening fans because I've done gardening off and on my whole career. So I thought, use that, again, go with your strong suit. And so I took the technology, I took my strong suit, which is that I had a body of work. I had some old books that I'd written that I could parse from. I had some new ideas, and I had this big garden around me. And I started, I got a digital camera, started taking pictures, started writing stuff. This was in 2008. And just sort of went from there. So I think that's the important part. And you kind of alluded to this before. You have to pick your subject. I don't think anyone wants another sort of all things for all people online play. I mean, if you want that, you can go to the Huffington Post and browse around a million different subjects, right? But, one of us as individuals, we're never going to do that competently. So why not filter, distill, curate, whatever word we want to use, some subject, or put a lens on a few related subjects. So I do my gardening thing, but my gardening thing, again, is also about nature and science. It's also about food, because growing your own food, and it's about cooking and preserving and putting up food. So it's about these sort of circles that overlap like a little, solar system. Gardening is in the middle because that's my lens into the world. But then there's these other ones that I write about as well. And again, I use my reporter skills that I learned all those years ago on those assignments I didn't want to do about sports and finance and fashion. I use the reporter skills. I interview people a lot as well as doing my own stories. So that's kind of how the blogging thing happened. I used what I knew best, and I picked a platform that I thought was best for my needs, and just kind of went with it. It's fun. It's my favorite thing to do, by the way, is blogging.
Really?
I love it. I love it because you have a community of people who talk to you. And I also do a public radio program every week, and that's also available on podcast and so forth. So, I mean, I do gardening in every medium that you can really do it. Long form, short, books, magazine stuff occasionally, the blog 3-4 days a week, maybe 5 days a week in season, the podcast once a week with the local NPR station. I do a lot of reaching out about this subject, but I get the most feedback from the blog readers. They're going, oh, thank goodness you said this because I really wanted to know that. Or they ask me questions and I get to answer. It stretches my knowledge. So I love the interactivity. Helps me grow, helps me keep growing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's a great way to engage your readers, even do research, find out what works and what doesn't work.
Absolutely, like a focus group a little bit, isn't it?
Yeah, I was talking to Gretchen Rubin about that, and she said that's what she uses her blog for, just to kind of float ideas out there and see what people like and don't like.
Yes, and I will say that I'm sure she does too, I know her, and I'm sure she does the same. Sometimes when I'm not sure if a subject for a piece is the right piece, I put it out on Facebook. I have a good-sized group there too, and I put it out there. And if it kind of is sticky there, if it gets some attention there, I know that I should invest the time in the bigger story. I kind of ask the Facebook people, hey, what about this? Are you having problems with blah, blah, blah right now? Do you need to know about this? So you don't really get that in longer form writing. You're not going to get that type of feedback right away.
Yeah, it takes 6 months or a year or 2 years
my goodness.
To get the feedback.
Or a lifetime.
Yeah, absolutely. So I kind of want to start wrapping up here. I want you to talk a little bit more about how gardening has affected your life. Obviously, it's a passion of yours, but what have you learned from gardening about writing?
You see, the two for me are sort of inextricably linked.
And maybe a better question is, what do they both teach each other, about the other, or what do they have in common?
Yes, they're very similar. They're very, very similar. And they're very, by the way, both of them are very similar to yoga or other meditative and spiritual practices, oddly enough, at least I think so. Patience, they're really all practices for building patience. There's nothing more patience forming in a person than to either try to write something as long as a book and stick with it, and maybe fail, know that you may fail, or to go plant a garden and know that, again, you may fail. There are forces bigger than us at work in both those things,
Yeah.
There may be the no from the editor, or, the weather may foil your plans to have a successful harvest outside. So I think humility, I think both teach humility. I think both teach you to be with yourself. You have to have discipline. I write every single day because I love it and I want to be productive and I enjoy expressing myself by typing, for whatever that's worth. So I think they teach you discipline, both things. Neither has instant payoffs, as we were just speaking about. So they're very, very similar to me. And again, my view of gardening informs the way I write because I sort of see everything almost, the word anthropomorphic, where we humanize things that are not human. I sort of botanomorphize everything. I don't know if that's definitely not a word. I made it up. But it's like I think of everything the way I think of the things that are growing outdoors. I sort of see the big cycle of life through the view outdoors. So again, I think that gives me a voice and a point of view. And that's when people reach out to me, editors at magazines, say, hey, we want you to write this piece for us. They know that I am that person who has that viewpoint. They're coming to me for that viewpoint. They're not coming to me for some other person's voice. They're coming to me for my voice. So honing your voice. And mine is kind of eccentric. I have a very eccentric way of writing, tough sentence structure, things that are just who I am. And I'm okay with that, even though sometimes I get nasty reviews on Amazon and stuff from people who say, what did someone say? My latest book is The Finnegan's Wake for Gardeners. So in other words, it's that obscure writing. And sometimes I am that way. But you know what? That's me. I'm here. This is what I do. My editor loves it. So it's a go.
Yeah, well, I mean, to be compared to Finnegan's, anything by James Joyce, I would be okay with that.
I know, but isn't it funny? I don't think it was meant as a compliment.
Right. Yeah, he was voted in 1999 as one of the most important people of the 20th century. So if the least, the most irrelevant thing that he's done is, still in the same ballpark of what I've done, cool.
Cool. Yes, exactly.
So the Backyard Parables, your new book, is kind of about this in a grander scope. It's about what you've learned about life from gardening and vice versa. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. Well, it's about the two layers, hence the title Parables. So there's what I call on the blog, my blog is awaytogarden.com, and it says the motto on it is, the subhead is horticultural how-to and woo-woo. And by that I mean, there's the literal thing, like you're going to get a harvest of a ripe tomato, and here's how deep to plant the tomato, and here's when to sow the seed. And then there's the other harvest, the other aha, that's much more profound. And I was talking about that just a minute ago about like, hey, you can't control everything. You have to be humble. Stuff's going to die. Life is short and ephemeral. There's a lot of bigger lessons, and that's the woo-woo, of course. Our connection to nature, our role as just one little creature in the food chain, even though we try to be in charge of it all the time. We're not. We're just another organism in the food chain of life, of the cosmos or whatever. So I tried to do that in the book, and there are how-to sidebars as well as about 75 or 80% of it is memoir-style writing. So it was kind of a fun book to write. It really does represent the two sides of how I see from my window and from my garden the world. So, yeah.
So do you know what's next for you? Or are you somebody who's always planning ahead, or are you just kind of, waiting to see what comes? What's going on there?
I had done 2 books back to back. I was very, very lucky, very blessed that my editor bought the second one right at the time the first one was coming out in these last few years. And so that was, wonderful. And of course, I would like to do another one, both economically and because also I love the long form writing. Mm-hmm. I love having a project. But the tricky thing about that is if you have something like that hanging over you, if you have a commitment to write, 80,000 words or 100,000 words in X amount of time, you have to give it a lot of your hours. And what I hadn't done since I detached myself from the crazy corporate success world 5 years ago, what I hadn't done was sit quietly. And what I hadn't done, because I'd done 2 books and I'd done the blog and I go. And I lecture, I lecture probably like 30 times a year. I go out and lecture, so I'm very active. But what I hadn't done was just sort of sit with the feelings, as they say, just kind of contemplate where I was at. And I think after 5 years here, it was time to not take that big assignment. Mm-hmm. And it's scary, Jeff. I'll tell you the truth. It's scary because there's not that check coming, right? I don't know what my income will be this year or next year, but I'm trying to figure out if I'm allowing myself the time to maybe grow the garden blog even bigger, which could be a way for more income and already is starting to yield more income. The first 4 years, I didn't even have ads on the blog. So I'm doing a lot of that work to sort of build that part of my sort of business over here. So I'm a little scared by not having that signed paper for some other big thing. But on the other hand, sometimes we need the empty space to figure out how to fill it better, right? And sometimes you take a little break from one form of work and another presents itself. So,
right. I mean, I think this is your story, right? I mean, you're having to take some of your own medicine. I am. You left the one type of hubbub for another, and I can totally relate to...
Well, self-employment it's not to be... The complexity of self-employment is not to be underestimated. If anyone who's listening is thinking of jumping ship from a hectic job, self-employment is not a walk in the park.
Yeah.
Every day, you're the help desk who has to fix the computer. You're the supply administrator who has to order the computer paper or whatever. You're the person who has to, you know what I mean? You do everything. You have to do the bills. You have to do so self-employment is not a small matter.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Now I'm depressed. No, I'm kidding. I love it.
No, I mean, I was just reading your biography on Amazon, and you say, your first line of your bio is, I garden because I cannot help myself.
Yes.
And I can relate to that. I mean, I think that's how I feel about writing. And
so do I.
Yeah, I know.
Yes.
I know you do.
Yes, absolutely.
And I think that's what it comes down to, is that you're compelled, you're called. As my friend says, you can't not do it. It is, whatever risk or sacrifices involved. You'll have to figure it out, but writing is something that you simply can't not do, and you've got to find a way to do it, and you're doing just that. And
right. And you can get paid for it, but you have to take every assignment as seriously, whether it's, writing for the church newsletter or the PTA bulletin at the start, or the local paper or whatever. You have to take every assignment as seriously as you would writing for the New York Times. You know what I mean? You have to do everything with that sort of like that journalistic, that repertorial, that research, that devotion that you would take every assignment seriously. And I think by doing that, again, you develop that voice and your reputation, and eventually people do start coming to you to hear from you. So, yeah.
Love that. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think that's a good word, and it's a good note to end on.
Yeah, write all the time. Write for anyone who'll have you.
Yeah, because it takes a lot of practice, and I think, as you said, you have to earn the right to have your own voice be heard, which I think is absolutely true.
Oh, boy.
Thanks so much.
Oh, it's so nice to speak to you. Thank you. You've got me thinking now.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. For those listening, if you want to pick up Margaret's new book, it is called The Backyard Parables. You can find it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, all those great places. And you can find Margaret at her blog, awaytogarden.com. Thanks so much, Margaret.
Well, thank you for spending some time with us today. Remember to head over to goinswriter.com for more episodes of The Portfolio Life, and please do head over to iTunes as well. Leave us a quick, honest review. It helps others find out about the show.
But I was well into my career before my passion, my personal passion, matched my journalism work. Before that I was writing about or editing in sports, in finance. I was on the photo desk for a while at the Times, fashion, lots of different assignments.